So this is rose oil production in Northern California wine country. There's a reason for that. So what's best for rose oil production? Well, realtors will always say location, location, location. Well, for rose oil production, that's not right. That's not the best thing. There are 4 important things for rose oil production. Of course, the last one is selling your product, but it's weather, the rose itself, and labor. Now, why is weather important? Well, a lot of people don't realize that rose oil is made up of some 270 fragrant chemicals, and that these chemicals begin to evaporate from the rose starting at 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so it would be impossible to grow roses for rose oil production in a very hot place. You would never dream of doing that in the San Joaquin Valley. To give you examples of what would happen if you didn't pick your roses by 9 o'clock in the morning, you have lost 30% of your oil. And by noon, you have lost 70% of the oil that's in the rose. So you need microclimates that have a temperature profile. I remember the first time I contacted the Bulgarian bureaucrat about, they have this whole rose oil production and institute. And the first thing he asked was, what's your temperature profile? And I went, well, I'll look it up. And I kind of blindingly went on. Now, I'll sort of come back to the temperature issue a little bit later. Now, you need a rose to get the oil from. And it turns out there's just a handful of roses that are really good for rose oil production on a commercial scale. And what you need is a rose with very, very strong fragrance. Okay, it's a given. 2, it has to bloom in profusion. Now, there's a lot of nice roses out there that have just great fragrance, Mr. Lincoln, Chrysler Imperial, and so forth. But they don't produce a lot in a short period of time. They'll start producing, and it just sort of lopes along. And you need blooms that will, roses that bloom early in the spring. And why do you need to do that early in the spring? It has to do with the temperature. If the blooming starts in the summer, then your temperature, everyday temperature, is way high. Also, early in the springtime, the day is much shorter. The difference between around mid-April through the end of May is almost 3 hours in the day. So early in the morning is when the oil is in the rose. Let's see. Now, labor. I'm going to mention a few things about labor. There's me. There's my daughter. And I have some, this was Betty, and this is Jose. And I've had all kinds of people around. And what happens is, as I mentioned, by 9 o'clock or 12 o'clock, almost all the oil is gone out of the rose. And what happens is, especially in the wine country, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 o'clock, the Pacific Ocean comes in and the temperature will often drop almost 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And it starts to drop into the mid-50s. So what happens is our rose is continuing to manufacture the scent. And it manufactures it through the early evening into the late evening and all through the night. And then we come around 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and all that oil, fragrance is trapped in the petals because of the temperature. So that's when you begin to harvest the roses. starting around 5:30, and we're pretty much done by 8 o'clock. I prefer to be done by 7:30. And that is the end of the harvest. It's only like 2 hours. It'd be nice to pick at 12 o'clock. I mean, I can have lunch and all that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, all the oil will be gone. And it costs a lot of money to harvest roses. I used to pay $10 an hour just 2 years ago. Now it's up to $12.50. And there seems to be some sort of point at which I don't have to chase after workers because they decide there's something more profitable or that kind of thing. A lot of these people can't get there. They don't have their own transportation, so I have to go pick them up. And a lot of times I have to bring them back to sort of like the labor camps so that they can work another job that starts at 8 o'clock or something like that. So it's very tricky to get workers there. And so it's a big problem. Now, I pay $12.50 an hour, but in Bulgaria and other countries like that, they average like $2 an hour. And so it's very difficult to compete with that. And so by selling all our product from our ranch, we don't wholesale it out, then we can at least have run in the black on that. This is labor part 2. We have to prune the roses. Now, this was a tour. We had a perfume rose harvest tour that we have in the springtime, and it happened to be raining that day. And you can see what the roses look like. They're all nice and green here. But after we pick, like the last time we pick is towards the end of May. Right after that, a couple of weeks, we come in and we just hedge it. Just take a big power mower and just like that and just hedge it down to about 3 foot high. Now in Bulgaria, they tried an experiment. They tried hedging it at 3 foot, 4 foot, 5, 6, and just letting it go. And it turned out the best oil production was not hedging at all, except you'd have to deal with all the stuff the following year, so that wouldn't work. But a very close second was hedging it to 3 feet. And what happens is this will start to grow over the summer and into the fall, and it'll be like 3 foot high, and by the end of summer it'll be close to 6 foot high. And the reason why you do that is the rose will start to produce about 7 to 10 days earlier than if you hadn't pruned it in early June. So again, that's key to the temperature of trying to get that oil successfully. Okay. All right. This is how we make the rose oil. We've picked the roses, and usually it starts out maybe I'll get a pound the first time that I go out and pick. Then the next day it's maybe 1.5 pounds, and eventually it'll get up to 120 pounds in a day. And we put all those roses. Now this is a Prohibition era still from the 1920s. So it does have other uses besides corn mash. And there's 2 steps to separating the oil from the roses. And the first is you take advantage of this temperature that the rose oil evaporates out of the rose, and you use steam. So we have just here a propane burner, and it heats up. There's a couple of gallons of water in there, and the steam percolates through all these roses, and the oil evaporates out of the rose, and then it proceeds over into our condenser. And the steam condenses back to water, and the oil, which is vapor, now gets the water in there is below 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and the oil vapor turns back into liquid oil. Okay, so now the second separation. That is where we take advantage of the density of oil. The oil floats on top. So it's a 2-step process. Separate the oil from the roses, and then in the condensed water and the condensed oil, the oil will float to the top. There's a little valve at the bottom of this sepatory funnel, and I can slowly drain the rose water out the bottom and accumulate the oil here. Now, there's not a lot of oil. It takes 1 pound of roses to make 1 drop of rose oil. And this year, I'm just going to go back here a little bit. Oops, this is supposed to be this way. Excuse me. Come on. Oh, okay.
Do you want me to bounce it?
No, I'm just, this is the one I wanted. I'm fine. From all these roses here, there's about 120 pounds, well, it's about 60 pounds here, and we'll only get 60 drops of rose oil. And that's roughly, not much, because it takes the entire season to produce only 3 or 4 ounces of rose oil. Now, to give you a comparison, if you wanted lavender oil, you've probably seen these beautiful pictures in France, these long lavender fields, and they're all in long rows. Well, they have this big giant lawnmower with a lavender catcher in it, and they just go, and they just get it all, and they put the entire plant into their steam distillation equipment. And because the plant is, it's a semi-arid plant, the entire plant has oil in it. So if you wanted 1 pound of lavender oil, you'd only need 200 pounds of lavender plant. Okay, and that's a very high grade lavender you can get. But if you wanted 1 pound of rose oil, you'd need somewhere between 8,000 to 10,000 pounds of hand-picked roses. And rose fields are not amenable to mechanical harvesting. And that's why rose oil is very expensive. You can get very good grades of Bulgarian rose oil from $500 to $850 dollars per ounce, and it goes up to as much as $2,200 per ounce of rose oil. And a lot of these very high-end cost rose oils are used in some of the old perfumes that they stay true to the original formulas and are not tempted to use substitute synthetic chemicals. And so, so some of your very finer, more expensive, older perfumes will have the real stuff in it. In fact, there's a whole bunch of people that will do nothing but collect old, unopened perfume bottles so that they can get the original stuff, because a lot of companies will tend to reformulate it and make it sort of, how do you call it, like famous one is, let's see, Joy. They make it Joy-ish 60 years after it was introduced in the 1940s. So you don't know what you're getting unless you're a professional who knows you can actually tell. Okay, so we've learned now how to separate oil from the roses. And okay, we get to the marketing. As I had to pay my pickers close to $3,000 to pick all of 3 ounces of rose oil. So it's very expensive. I need something to support my habit of rose oil. So, oops, I'm sorry. Oh, darn it. Sometimes this thing gets a little bit. Okay, okay. We make rose water and the perfume from the rose oil that we collect. And we have tours. We call them perfume rose harvest tours. Those are in the spring. They're usually very small groups, 8 to 12 people in a group. Generally, you only have 22 tours for the entire spring season. We have deluxe tours where we serve rose water infused foods. We have a rose water sorbet, a baklava, Turkish delight, and we have some little rose water infused sandwiches. So it's and then I also present what I call an atomizer museum, which is very interesting. Okay. So here's our rose water, and it's like you can see here, it's a co-product of making the rose oil. It's the water that's right below that oil that floats on top as we accumulate it, and so we collect that little layer there, and it's It's milky in color, and it's because there's a colloidal suspension of oil, microscopic droplets that are in the water that take maybe 6 months to a year to rise to the top. They're so fine. And it's that water that we make the rose water from. I wanted a product that I could present that you wouldn't find in a Mediterranean little supermarket, because they have rose water there, but it's very dilute. And I can understand why, because it's, you know, you got this thing, you just dilute it, and most people don't know, except when you start using it in your recipes. Rose water, some of our customers gave us some feedback on our rose water, saying that in the little recipes they get, they only need to use about a half to a third as much of our rose water in it for the same, because it's so potent. It also is called, aromatherapists call it a rosewater hydrosol. You can rub it on yourself. It's a massage balm, but it's also a cologne. But it is a flavoring. Now, distillation was discovered in the 2nd century AD, and it was a Muslim doctor in the Middle East that applied it to roses to get the first rose oil. And so it's been in the Middle East since the 9th century, and they've learned to use it as a food flavoring. So hence we have baklava. That's one of the flavorings that you'll find in baklava. There's Turkish delight. This isn't it, but this is this rosewater sorbet, and it's just nothing but water and sugar and some of the rose water. And when you taste that, you swear it tastes just like you would smell a rose. It's just such a distinctive flavor. It's just like orange or peach. It is very, very distinctive, very delightful. Another thing we like to do is put a few drops in champagne, so you can take a cheap champagne and make it fabulous, and just a few drops. Oh, and then we have our rose embrace, and this is quite a challenge to make a perfume in California, because a lot of people don't like perfumes. There's bans on offices and all those sorts of things. And unfortunately, in the last 60 years, the industry has created all these synthetic chemicals that they use instead of the natural ingredients. Now, in 1910, 1900, a professional perfume maker, had about 300 separate essential oils and a few synthetic chemicals to create the perfumes of that era. And now, up to the year 2010 or so, we're up to 2,500 different chemicals, most of them synthetic. And modern perfumes nowadays are 85% synthetic chemicals. Now, rose oil's place in the world of perfume is that in about 90% of your perfumes, there will be some amount of rose oil, because it's considered a very good blending oil for making perfume. What we do is, which is unusual, is we have 4 different kind of roses. Let's see if I could. I did a test plot in 1995 or so to see what roses would do well, and I read as much literature as I could as to what was used possibly in fragrance or rose waters and things like that. So I grew 7 different roses, and after the 2nd year, I went out and did all this engineering type stuff. I've counted how many blooms I picked, how long it took me to pick, what was my estimation of what this scent was like, and that kind of thing. And then I selected down to 3 roses. And it was, the first rose is this one here, the Kazanlık rose, and that's the one grown in Bulgaria, Turkey, Morocco, Egypt, and even Arabia. And this is the queen of the roses for oil production. Its botanical name, Rosa damascena trigentipetala. Trigentipetala meaning 30 petals. This here blooms very quickly. This here, you'll see these buds here. They like pop open, and and they'll look something like this the first day, and by the 2nd day they will start to fade to pink, and by the 3rd day the petals will start dropping off. They're very short-lived. And so we pick these early in the morning, and that picture that Jan showed of the rose alley with all the blooms on there, that's what it looked like after we had already picked all the roses. I mean, we just stripped all the blooming roses off there, and by noon, they open up, and you can almost hear them popping, I swear. Then I just put this one is a damask rose. It's called Rose de Recht. This is a real good rose for potpourri. For some reason, these petals, when they dry, instead of turning like black or brown, they turn this kind of dark magenta, and they'll hold onto their fragrance for up to a month or a month and a half. You can still smell these petals, and they'll still be a nice scent. So they have a lot of the 270 chemicals I mentioned, there's probably some that don't boil off so quickly, or maybe boil off at a higher temperature, and they just really stick. This one here is called Ulrich Brunner from the 1850s. This is very prolific. This is the rose that I use to demonstrate on my tours what it's like when you prune. I have two rows. One I prune in June, and then one when I prune in the normal pruning time of January. And you can see the difference in that they start blooming about 10 days earlier, and it's got all sorts of buds on it, while the one that was pruned in January is way, way behind. And this has a lot of fragrance in it. It's very different fragrance than these other two. It has kind of a clove to it. Now this rose here, this is called Souvenir de Claudes de Noël, and it's from the 1920s. And when we were selling rose bouquets at the farmer's market, this was a very fragrant rose, and it didn't have the characteristic of opening so quickly. This would stay as long as 7-8 days. I think there's a genetic connection with roses that are fragrant and their vase life. Like the Kazan, like it's gone in 3 days. Ulrich Brunner is gone in 5 days. This here, the flowers start to shatter after the petals start to shatter off after a couple of days. And that's why florists don't have fragrant roses, is because the petals just drop off too quickly. This one here, it hung on for quite a bit of time, and but it tended to have this nasty habit of kind of having a little crook at the just about an inch below the rose, and it wasn't very good at the farmer's market for bouquets. So I thought, well, I'm going to do different trellising techniques. So I planted about a dozen of these plants and did different trellising techniques, and its fragrance is just, I mean, it just knocks your head off. It's just so potent and strong. And lo and behold, it bloomed almost as early as Kazanlik. I think it's maybe about 3 days after the Kazanlik starts bloom. And this comes off in just buckets. And this has a real strong citrus character to it. It almost smells like lemon drops, the hard candy. I have to tout my roses. First, we don't spray them. It's an all-natural product. We grow it here in California, and I can guarantee that we won't mess with it. Now, one of the things is if you just took a rose oil that you bought from a shop or something, it would be essentially pure Kazanlik rose oil, which is not a balanced scent. Now, a nose, when they create a perfume, they try and create a balance of scents. They have what they call a top note, a middle note, and a heart note, a base note, which sometimes they call dry-away note. The top note is the perfumer is imagining you're at Macy's or Broadway or whatever at this perfume bar, and you're going to pick up this bottle and you're going to smell it, and it's supposed to be so enticing that you want to put it on your skin to try it out. And that is called a top note. Now, typical of your top notes are in the citrus family. And the Souvenir de Claudes de Noël, the last one I talked about, that has this beautiful, lemony, sweet top note. And that is our top note in our perfume. And also, rose oil is considered a middle note for perfume making. That's why it's used so much in all perfumes. And for our base note, I use a little bit of ambergris. Okay. Now we have to age that for 4 months because it's like wine. It improves with age. When we do our tours, we smell fresh rosewater that has just come out of the still and rosewater that's been aged 1 year. And you can see, you smell a huge difference in that. So it does improve with age. And so that's why we're having our event this next month.
Repeat the question, please.
Oh, the question is, do we mix the pink and the reds or we keep them separate? We don't keep them separate and we don't pick the petals. We pick the entire bloom. And the reason you pick the entire bloom is because the bloom holds the petals open so the steam can percolate through it. If you picked only the petals, it'll pack on the bottom of your still and you can't not get an efficient extraction. But there we have, even though we picked 2,200 pounds last year, there still is not enough day to day to keep the oils separate. So I just have to accumulate the whole thing in one batch. So that's another reason that we age the oils, because we have the final rose mix by the end of May. Okay, another way to kind of make a little bit of money, and that is to have our Perfume Rose Harvest tours. You can see we have, they come there and they help go out and pick the roses, and I usually try and have them pick several different types. We stuff the still, and you can see the still, this is the old Prohibition era still here. And they have a lot of time, and I provide a lot of time for people to take pictures and lots of smiles. This is one group, this was our deluxe tour that came, and they had all got their roses, and this is one of the stops that we make so people can take pictures. We did this as a group picture. Okay. Now the one thing that I am going to be doing by this next spring, and this might be a first, I am going to, instead of using a propane burner, I'm going to use an electric heater to boil the water so that so we can reduce our carbon footprint and not burn propane.
Sorry, we're running out of time now.
Yes. Okay, I think really that's pretty much it. And it's a tough go in terms of, I'll just wrap up here. It's a pretty tough go to do the tours, the picking, paying for the harvesting and the pruning. And so we sell the rose water and the perfume, and we have these events. And the launch is a lot of fun, and try and get a lot of people there. And if you come, you'll get some Russian tea. I have some Russian artifacts there. We can have the Bulgarian singers. And also we'll have our perfume, and we have our wandering perfume maidens wandering around and giving you little spritz of the perfume. And if you can smell a rose, you should not have any ill reactions to it, because it's all natural. And I think we handed out that little flyer which describes that. And also, I will be there, not only being the perfumer, but I'll be Karnak the Magnificent. I will be giving out rose tea leaf fortune telling. So if you come, I'll guarantee you will get a good reading. Thank you.